Most stories only give us the key highlights. They help us navigate along a certain plot line. In our lives, our stories aren't always so fast-paced, so action-packed. There are times when things move very quickly, but there are also times when things move more slowly. We don't always go from adventure to adventure. Sometimes there are seasons when our pace of life calms down. From Athens, Paul finds himself in Corinth, the fourth biggest city in the Roman Empire. And whilst he's there, he makes friends with Aquila and Priscilla. He begins doing some tent making to support his work in ministry. And he goes about his business, preaching in the synagogues, week after week. Now, some come to faith, including the synagogue ruler, but the overwhelming reaction from the Jews is opposition and abuse. Paul shakes his clothes off in disgust and begins to work with the Gentiles. Now, Paul often went from place to place, preaching the gospel, planting churches. And I imagine that having got this kind of a reaction from the Jewish people, he felt it was time to go. It was time to scarper rather than deal with all of this abuse. But what's interesting is in this chapter, we discover that God speaks to him. He says, "Do not be afraid. Continue to speak. I am with you. No harm will come to you because I have people in this city." In essence, God is saying to Paul, stay put. Some of us like new challenges. We like starting new things, but we're not always so good at slogging through to the very bitter end. We like the visionary stage, but the practical input we find difficult. Sometimes we want to start a new thing rather than finishing what God has already given us to do. In chapter 18, we discover that Paul stays in Corinth for 18 months, a whole bunch of time. As he stays there, persecution does begin to increase. Perhaps it's partly because he set up a church right next to the synagogue. Paul is brought by the Jews to the official tribunal. There are charges laid against him, but Paul is set free. All of the charges are dropped. That promise that God gave him, that no harm would come to him in this city, has come true. Paul is freed. The safest place for us to be is in the very will of God. Are you the kind of person who's always clamoring for the next thing? Or perhaps the challenge from today is to stay put, to keep plodding on, to finish what you've started, to trust that God will complete the work that you have begun. Rather than always looking for the next thing, we must be faithful in the things that God has already called us to do.